We closed the door to freedom.
Дверь на волю.
We get caught instead of Russian unfreedom.
Русской несвободы.
Every day in the Corps carried the dead. People's hearts seized. This is not a case, it was a pattern because the cells were crowded. Up until the 90s, those sentenced to death were shot here. There's something like a bag on his head. Not to humiliate, but so that he wouldn't scream.
Кричать не стал.
This was done at night in a special cell, from which there was another exit to the prison yard. It was called the exit to hell. He is quickly taken there. He realizes that he is not in the cell, he is being lowered down. Here's a shot in the back of the head from a service weapon.
Из стабильного оружия.
That's it. And then the body is carried out through the door. In the morning, tickle the wall, and you're standing in this room. That's what prison is. Surviving after the punishment cell and not going crazy was really considered a feat. And even among the guards, tell people, I'm dying a thief. But even in ordinary cells in the worst years, there could be 20 people. As soon as one person got sick, after that the whole camera just died on its feet. And all this in the center of St. Petersburg. This is Lyadov, and today our issue is about how they sat and died in crosses, who were treated in a prison psychiatric hospital. How prisoners were tortured, who remained within these walls, even after moving to a pretrial detention center. Today, we will tell you what they really are, those very first St. Petersburg crosses. If you look at the crosses from above from the copter, yes, then it's clear where the name comes from. Both buildings are built in the form of two crosses with towers in the center. For what? The tower was supposed to be 4 guards. From it, all 4 corridors could be seen through. Although, of course, when the cell was opened in the 19th century, it was said that the prison was specially built, in the form of crosses in order to what? Were the prisoners in jail? So they thought about what they had done and thought about the Almighty and repented. But in fact, it's not like that. In other words, it was just practical. I mean, you know, right? The minimum number of guards is needed in order to keep the maximum number of prisoners under control. By the way, then the project of crosses was repeated in several Russian cities. For example, in my native Samara, there was also a prison, the Samara Cross. It was one building, however, according to the same project. Now it houses a student dormitory of the medical university. Actually, if we speak in a competent legal language, then crosses are a pretrial detention center. That is, not really a prison. It is a pretrial detention center. People were there before the sentencing. But in fact, this is a place of deprivation of a person's freedom, and it is also often called a prison. This can also be said about crosses. And besides, people there have been waiting for sentences for years. Initially, the crosses were very landscaped. Imagine, at the end of the 19th century, there was already electricity, a sewage system, and the prison was designed for 1,250 people. True, in the 90s, there were 16,000 prisoners, that is, about 15 times more. Can you imagine how people sat on each other's heads there? In other words, it's like you go into the subway at rush hour, yes, and now you basically can't get up. In fact, this is a rather strange feeling, because I had exactly the same feeling when I got into the cell in Belarus. When I got into the neighborhood, I went in, experienced exactly the same. Because we were brought in, there were so many people that you really, in general, could not even squat down everywhere. And we were in this state for a very long time. Well, then somehow, you know, all plus or minus resolved there, and, in principle, there was room for everyone. And I remember that even when people went to bed at night, they went to sleep on top of each other. Really, you know, like one person gets up there, a second person, a third, and you simultaneously lie down like this. So we went to bed and kind of fell asleep. And it's warm, and as if they lay down like a snake. Well, let's go back to the crosses. Tough survival conditions formed very strict rules. And if you violate them, you may not live to see the trial. Our Stas Garyanov studied this unique historical place and talked with former prisoners and doctors of crosses. In St. Petersburg, everything is as usual in winter. The temperature feels like minus 273, so I don't really understand how anything is moving here at all. But people are walking, and processes are going on. There is a completely dark corridor on both sides of the cell, and the doors to them are open. Look, this is a very thick metal structure, and it looks as if it has been here since the opening of the prison. A huge lock and a window in the middle. This is the so-called feeder, through which food was given to prisoners. There are not enough mattresses in the cells right now. This is how prisoners of the pretrial detention center have been sitting in their cells in recent years. For people at the entrance from both sides, they apparently arranged small shelves for themselves. A little lower, there is a table, also obviously homemade, and behind the bars by the window, there are plastic containers and rags. It can be seen that they were constantly used, but they were simply dried behind bars. There is a bedside table at the bottom, and next to it you see sockets. In the cells here it was allowed to have a kettle and even a TV. Another couple of outlets near the wash basin at the entrance. In general, it seems that the prisoners here have been taken out somewhere with their belongings, and a new batch is about to enter the hut. Everything looks terrible, but when you stand there, inside the camera, there's a clear feeling that it's possible to live here in principle. Someone was doing crosswords. And here even the Christmas tree toys have been preserved. In general, if you look closely, there is a lot of life left in the cells. A mattress made of swan's down on grandma's bed. Feather bed. The date on the newspaper is November 15, 2017 year. At that time, the prisoners were being transported to the new crosses in Kolpino. But it is interesting that despite the fact that so much time has passed in the cells, it still smells of smoking and sweat. This smell seems to be ingrained in the walls and does not fade even with the windows open. In the 30s, up to 20 people could sit in a cell, and even psychologically, not to mention living conditions. It was torture to live in such a crowd. This is the journalist Evgeny Vaishenkov. He knows what he's talking about. I spent a year in crosses. And no, he wasn't preparing a journalistic investigation. Vaishenkov was charged with extortion, and he was sitting here waiting for the verdict. You walk in, and you see that there are 10 people here. You get on the rush hour bus, and you don't understand what happened. And then you live. It's okay. Well, let's do it this way. Everyone has a kitchen. Everyone has friends. So you sat down in the kitchen with your best friends. You have a TV, food, phones, refrigerator. And you will spend a year in this kitchen with weak best friends. I think there will be problems in a few days. And it's not friends who gather here. It's people with difficult destinies, with bright characters, and generally capable of doing things. In general, Vaishenkov graduated from the prestigious Faculty of Oriental Studies of St. Petersburg University. But after graduating in 1985 year, he went to work in the Criminal Investigation Department. He was, without exaggeration, the most educated operative of the Soviet Union, with knowledge of German, English, Arabic, and Hebrew. But the dashing 90s came and Vaishenkov switched sides. He entered the organized criminal group. Racketeering was then the main source of income for bandits. But already in 1992, it gets into the crosses. Today, going to his cell, he seems to have no emotion at all. And, by the way, he doesn't complain about life in prison at all. This is called 293. The camera. Every person remembers some numbers for a lifetime. Maybe a phone number. Here, I have remembered 293 for the rest of my life. Well, because I came here. Here. Hello, everyone. There were a couple of operas sitting here. Some kind of investigator was sitting meticulously. A couple of sergeants were sitting. Well, about 8 people were sitting. And some colonel from the Ministry of Defense was sitting, something like that. Well, everyone is like that. Prisoners. Arrested.
Арестованные.
The cell in which Yevgeny was sitting is called a BIS for former employees of the internal affairs bodies. There were no privileges for such cameras, but they were put together more for safety. I have heard that former employees of internal organs sit poorly. It's all nonsense. Nonsense. That's all. What's bad is good. Here we had a camera here, and there were bratva around. Well, first of all, you know half of it, and secondly, but how bad it is. Everyone should live together. Someone has run out of something, someone owes something to someone to transfer, someone will insure. It was quite difficult to eat belanga. To begin with, it was necessary to divide one spoon with a solid one for everyone. They brought such an aluminum basin with porridge and 1 millet porridge on all spoons, either with butter or with something. Well, that's all the food. One basin for everyone and 1 spoon for everyone. Yes. I mean, how is it? Yes. Either one at a time or whatever you want. What is a grunt? Kryapa is such a food. In general, it's a shorter meal of some kind of frozen cabbage and frozen potatoes. A fish dish, if it goes, for example. There was no menu, of course. They didn't say it was an ear or something. For example, a fish dish. There were only bones. Bones of some kind, either frostbitten or incomprehensible. But it was possible to eat it, but if you had no other opportunity. For example, here I was sitting, practically did not eat such food. Because, for example, there was its own bakery. Here's a pipe there, you see here. Bakery. And there they baked black bread, from which souvenirs were made. This black bread, it was like plasticine. That is, it was so soft, sticky. Figures were made of it, painted for sale, for exchange. But if you eat this piece of blackie of this bread, you start to have pains in your stomach. That is, then he's like a very, very heavy meal, as it were. After the well, it's hard to get used to it. Alexander Nevzorov got into the crosses in '99 and sat for a year. He was charged with 4 counts, 2 of which were for extortion. He was, in fact, a collector. I worked first in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, then left there, went into commerce and studied. At that time, there were fashionable barter schemes, assignment of debts. We were doing ours. Well, I was studying. Was part of the job, which is now engaged in so-called reservoirs. At that time, it was considered as if it was new. Did everyone beat out debts, roughly speaking? Well, I didn't walk down, I didn't kill anyone, I didn't beat anyone. But the extortion article, in short, he was definitely going to sit for more than 10 years, and extortion in prison circles was then, well, honorable or something. In short, it's not shameful. Sleeping in a cell with 6 beds is only possible in shifts, and he gets the privilege of sleeping at night. There is the first day shift, there is the night shift. A privileged shift is considered to be a day shift that does not sleep during the day, sleeps at night. When to get up and when to go to bed, the day shift, that is, the first shift, decides. At the same time, we saw the daily routine in the central tower. Look, there is a physical examination at 8 in the morning, a walk until 12, there is even a personal time, from 7 to 10 in the evening. But how was all this observed, despite the fact that people live in the cells in 2 shifts? The answer is generally expected. Yes, nothing matches. Does not match. Sometime, when? There, probably in the 30s. He matched it, but in the 90s, well, it's all funny. And how was it for real? That's when the rise. When is tomorrow? Rise when I woke up. Here's a lift for you. Nevertheless, on Thursdays there is a sauna, an hour walk for those who want, food again. All this is only during the daytime, and it was just very hard to live in a cell on the second shift. It means that the conditions of detention in the prisoner's cell are inhuman. A person does not sleep at night, and during the day he has to go to court or to a lawyer, or to an investigator. A person who did not become at night, which he cannot physiologically do some things. Maybe he did not go to the toilet. He did not eat something else. He has to be up all day somewhere, let's say in court. And there is a reason to live in court. You need to sit, you need to communicate, you need to put forward your line, you need to talk to a lawyer, you need to defend yourself somehow. And how to do it when? In other words, the conditions are simply inhuman. Communication between the cameras could happen all the time. No one even tried to hide it. This thing is called a feeder.
Штуковина называется кормушка.
Must be closed. During the distribution of food, it opens there. Well, Belanda in Russian. But if there are serious prisoners here, the feeder is always open. Why? Well, first of all, you can smoke, and secondly, you can talk. The feeder is open there, the feeder is open here, and so on. Here, let's say 28278. And there, let's say 283.
283. Он подходит и кричит.
283. And someone came up to my brother, and so on. They're talking. Well, nothing secret and so on, right? But they talk. It's all like. It's all strict isolation. In general, communication was established at the crosses at the highest level. Look, there's a whole web of white threads between the cameras here. They are called the gut and are made from improvised means. Clothes, sheets, threads, or even hair are used in extreme cases. And the prisoners have hole weaving techniques. But a stretched gut from one camera to another is already called a road. They pull it from one cell, throw a string with a load or a hook into another cell. There they cling to the bars. And after that you can pass notes, food, cigarettes, and anything on the way. The main thing is that the cargo itself crawls through the window grating. The connection between the cameras was very important for the inmates, not only in everyday terms. Well, for example, two accomplices can correspond like this and coordinate the necessary testimony for the investigation. If they are not confused even in small things, then it will be more difficult to find fault with them. And here the main question arises, does none of the employees cut off these roads? Well, there are 10,000 people here. He turned off, of course, every day. So what? They say that prohibit smoking in different cities of the Russian Federation caught a lot of smokers. The fewer cigarettes were sold. But, of course, it was necessary to contact not only the nearest cameras, but also those in other buildings. And for this they used a huge tube made of newspaper or some other paper. Imagine you need to blow out this thread with a load so that it not only reaches the body, but also reaches a very specific window, and even gets caught there. And in the crosses, for example, with such a macker, messages could be forwarded from a distant building to freedom in general. Then they were shot by special people. They were shot at will with special cameras. All these roads, open to the communication of the feeder, were not even considered violations. And with money, you could drag anything into the cell at all to brighten up your stay here. Since I have already lived an active life with athletes, that is, I was already in the fraternity, then, well, I had opportunities. So let's call it. I think I came, everyone is sitting there. One opera, I heard about one opera, I saw someone, everyone got acquainted quickly. Here. Well, I said, look, well, how could I not from the police got here? I'm already on the street moved. So, why do we live so boring? We need a TV, we need some kind of electric heating pad, we need this, that, right. Well, that is, he began to settle in. Not because you're cool, but because, well, it's yours, it's your home. Someone has no opportunities, no and no. And I had them at the expense of status, at the expense of friends. Well, that's it, and everyone was dragged here. Then, well, something like that. There's a mirror here. Well, maybe it's funny, but several games were dragged into football, hockey, but these are tame ones. Well, of course, we didn't need the cards, well, just not ours. I don't like non-gaming myself. Dominoes? Some games have appeared in these stores. Then chess, checkers, some decent books appeared.
Книги какие-то приличные.
Alexander got into the crosses in April of the 99th, and with the onset of summer, just hell began. There was no need for any punishment cells. People also died in ordinary cells, and they forbade opening these feeders. The weather was very hot, and the windows there are closed. The windows do not open. And there were a lot of deaths. And they carried out, here is the summer of 99th year, every day they carried out the dead from the building, that is, people's hearts seized. And these are cases, it's just not a condition. This? Yes, this is not the case. Killed someone, not stabbed. No, this is not a case, it was a pattern because the cells were crowded. I don't know, guys, when it's worse here. That's when several thousand souls, both prisoners and warders, used to languish here, or now, when there is absolute emptiness. Silence, darkness, it's very unpleasant, to be honest, and somehow creepy. All these lattices and crosses in general are just a palace of lattices and concrete. And you know the smell. It smells like this here. Well, I'm sorry, you know, if you took a piece of shit, bread it so musky, and sprinkled it with steers on top for decoration. But people always try to adapt to the conditions, even if they are inhuman. And as a rule, they tried to monitor hygiene in the cells. Bath on Thursdays, and everyone was given no more than 5 minutes. Take another look at this camera. Imagine 13 people, and can you believe that here inside the cage, the prisoners organized a shower room for themselves? We reveal the cards. I also want to say that this system of cleanliness is very important because, so to speak, in this life. When there are 13 people in one place, it is very important to observe cleanliness. And people wash, for example, we did how? They were taking a shower. This was not allowed in prison at all, but they did not close their eyes to it, so to speak. When the toilet itself is a long way off. A person stands on the toilet inside. There is a kind of cover on top, and water is pouring from above. A person can completely take a shower, wash his head, wash himself completely, standing with his feet on the toilet. People, if you want to be the first to know about our new adventures and about my new releases personally, subscribe to the channel. Click the bell and like. Maybe you are sick of these phrases, but it really motivates us unrealistically. Motivates you to do even more and better cool releases for you. In order to eat normally in prison and still have some buns, it was necessary to establish contact with the guards. And here everything was decided by money. Then any food will be brought from the outside, and alcohol too, what you order. If it cost 100 rubles in the store, then it cost 200 rubles there. It wasn't worth 1,000 rubles. So it was possible to buy everything in prison there: beer, vodka, liqueurs, cognac, champagne, and anything. Brought vodka corps and keepers, those who are supposed to guard, as it were, who work daily, they also brought. Could bring truants, that is, those who are engaged in a walk. Well, it's different there. Money was transferred through a lawyer, through everything was bought, and everything was sold. So, if you have money, if you have, as it were, the opportunity to buy, then you feel completely different. It's not a problem to buy, but it was necessary to be able to get rid of empty bottles. You can't just throw them away. During inspections, both prisoners and the warden can fly in for this. In short, the bottle was wrapped in a towel and then trampled underfoot to glass dust, which was flushed down the toilet. Most of the bandits who sat in crosses in the 90s did not even try Belanda. The processes were set up so that the food was prepared either by themselves in the cell or received with will. And here too, without the help of supervisors, it would be impossible to organize such transfers, of course. And here the obvious question is, why did the guards indulge in all this? They sold alcohol themselves, helped with the transfers. And the answer is precisely in the time at which all this happened, the 90s. He is not paid a salary. Literally. Well, wait there in 3 months until we pay the salary. It's fine. And he can't buy a popsicle for a child. He's so humiliated. Next. Prison has to pay for electricity. It has to pay for butter. It has to pay for porridge. And the only thing he can earn or somehow live is here. At the expense of whom? At the expense of the royal iron. And he goes, Kolya passes. He goes, approaches, well, half of the huts are serious there. Guys, give me a cup of tea. Now, if you want some tea, we'll make these sandwiches now. Here's a case for you, and had breakfast. In other words, the inmates were in fact in a better position than the warders themselves. There is no salary, there is nothing to buy in stores, and your wife and children are at home, and you have power over people who, although locked in a cell, do not count money. Well, what happens if you organize a program with food, TV, and even vodka? No one will know, but you can live on this money for a couple of weeks. That's how life was organized under the then newly minted market economy. But do not think that crosses are a friendly and responsive community. There were some guards who were feared by everyone without exception. A special unit used to be, now I don't know how, called masks. That is, young healthy guys in uniform, tall, strong. They all wear masks, they don't take off their masks. This division is like intimidation and punishment. That is, for example, if there is a shmon, if there is some kind of washing, or some kind of going on. A stage is going on or something else. They call the masks, they are right there. And they have batons, they don't have firearms. They're all with batons. And they are ready to suppress aggression at any moment. And not that they are ready, they constantly demonstrate it. They behave in a way that they kind of. I do not know how to explain it. They, for example, they don't just stand, they waddle like that, showing with their whole appearance that they are, as it were, aggressively set up. They can bounce, they can make some kind of movements, like, just like monkeys, you know. Now, there is a certain order. For example, if there is a mess in the hut, if something else, the Corps calls these masks masked resort. Expel everyone from the hut, beat with batons who managed to hide, then did not have time to hide. If there are instigators, take them to the crankcase. Let's go. The punishment cell. But in Russian it's called a punishment cell, and in prison it's called a pit. This is the same camera for one person, but there is a nuance. Look here. Here you can't see the key bed.
Здесь не видно кровати. Шпонка.
But you can see this thing.
Видна вот такая штука.
It's called a stump. Here is this icon. It is at night. It is placed and rests against a stump.
Она, в ночное время она кладется и упирается в пень.
And on the day she climbs. And a person has the right to stand and walk.
и ходить.
And he can't do anything else. He can't lie down, sit down.
Сесть.
And sit on a stump. He can't sit down, he can get up. Is it possible to stand on a stump, but not sit down?
Да.
Yes. Just stand or walk. And this is a real test. It's bitterly cold in the cell. They don't take you out of the punishment cell for a walk. And that's how you have to sit, or rather stand for 15 days. But they could have been extended for another 15, then for the same amount. Not everyone withstood such a punishment, but in order to somehow warm up at night, they tore up the mattress and slept inside. The most difficult thing is always physiology. It's not
Это не
fatigue.
усталость.
You
Ничего
can't
не
do
болит.
anything. How long
Сколько
can
ты
you
можешь
walk back
ходить
and forth?
взад-вперед?
Well,
Ну, просто.
just. I constantly
Я
translate it
постоянно
into
перевожу
some
это
vulgar,
на
everyday story,
какую-то
but it's very
пошлую,
simple.
Бытовую историю, но это очень просто.
You've
Вы
come
пришли
home.
домой.
Well,
Ну,
take a little
потратьте
time,
немножко времени.
go into the bath, and walk around the
Зайдите
bath, 3 steps there,
в
3
ванну.
steps back.
И ходите по ванне. 3 шага туда, 3 шага обратно.
Funny,
Смешно.
after how long will you
Через
stop being
сколько
funny?
времени вам прекратит быть смешно?
I will
Я вам
answer you.
отвечу.
In 2
Через
minutes.
2 минуты.
In 5
Через
minutes,
5 минут
you'll start freaking out.
Вы начнете психовать.
Minutes.
Минут.
And in
А
20
через
minutes, it will turn
20
into some
минут
kind of mockery.
Это превратится в какое-то издевательство.
Minutes.
Минут.
And I
я
say,
говорю,
15,
15,
15,
15.
15. I'll tell you honestly, even though there's not a single soul in the building except us right now, I didn't want to lock myself in this cage to feel it. All the horror is felt even with the door to the corridor open. Worse than a punishment cell can only be a punishment
Может быть,
cell of the
только
30s.
Карцер 30-х годов.
Here, on the other hand, the shkanka does not recline. Reclines,
Откидывается,
reclines.
откидывается.
Don't
Не
worry,
переживайте,
yes.
да.
I'm cleaning it now,
Конечно.
too. Of course. In the morning, people will be against the wall, and you're standing in this room, and that's it, right? And you can't lean against it, because this is called a fur coat. It's
Она
sharp.
острая.
You're not
Ты к ней
leaning
не
against it.
прислонишься.
This,
Это
it's a
это
monstrous
чудовищный
closet
шкаф, где
where
где
to
надо
spend
провести
15 days,
15 суток.
where it's
Где
cold,
холод,
where they
где
don't feed,
не
where any
кормят,
movement, and you are punished, and so on,
где
and so on.
любое движение, и тебя наказывают, и так далее, так далее.
Hence,
Отсюда-
when these thieves, we are not talking about the bad or the good now.
Когда у людей, когда у этих воров, мы сейчас не говорим про плохое или про хорошее.
This is
Да
generally
вообще
the wrong
неправильный
conversation,
разговор.
but to
Потому
the
что
fact
отсюда
that tell people
кричали,
I'm dying a thief.
передайте людям, я умираю вором.
There are 2
Таких
such
карцеров
Carters
здесь
here,
2,
and,
по словам
according to
Евгения,
Evgeny,
уже в
no one
позднее
used them
советское
in the late
время их
Soviet
никто не
period.
использовал. Это
This was
считалось
considered too
слишком
cruel a
жестоким
punishment.
наказанием.
No one
Сколько
knows
людей
how many
погибло в этих
people
клетках,
died in these
сейчас
cages
никто не
now,
знает,
but
а
many
умирали
died
здесь
here
тогда
then.
много.
Kresty
Кресты
was
были
one of
одной
the
из
few
немногих
executive prisons in the
исполнительных тюрем в
country
стране, где до
where death
97 года
sentences
пока
were
не
put into
ввели
effect
мораторий,
until the
приводили в действие
97th year,
смертные приговоры.
until a moratorium was introduced. We are
Мы
on 2-1.
находимся на 2-1.
In the
В
crosses,
крестах
everyone knew what
все знали,
2-1
что
was.
такое 2-1.
This is the
Это
first floor of the
первый
first cross,
этаж
where death row inmates sat
первого
before the
креста,
moratorium on the death penalty. But then life?
где до моратория на смертную казнь сидели смертники, но потом пожизненные.
It's such a
Это
rotten
такое
place.
гиблое место,
They say you
Говорят,
can't
что-
speak ill of the dead there.
о мертвых нельзя говорить плохо там
And
и
so
так
on.
далее.
But it is
Но о
definitely
тех,
impossible
кто
to speak badly
уже
about those who
смертник,
are already a suicide
Точно
bomber.
говорить плохо нельзя.
If there are
Если там
movements and conversations in the
креста
crosses,
движения,
then here they are
разговора,
already walking without shuffling,
то здесь
and there
уже
are no screams,
так.
and there
И
are no
ходят,
chimes, and
не
there are no
шаркая,
notes, and so
и
on
криков
and so
не
on.
слышно, и перезвонов нету, и записок нету, и так далее, и так далее.
Sit,
Сиди,
think.
думай.
It's scary
Страшно
to think
подумать о
about
чем.
what? In the hallway,
В коридоре смертника
suicide
стоит
is a
такая
deafening silence,
оглушающая
that
тишина,
tingling
что
chills.
мурашки пробирают.
In appearance, the
С
other
виду здесь
blocks
всё так
have
же, как
thick
и в
steel
других
doors,
блоках. Стальные
feeders for
толстые
each
двери,
peephole,
кормушки,
behind
на
them the
каждый
same 8
глазок,
square
за ними
meters.
те же самые 8
Only they sat
квадратных
here
метров,
alone,
только сидели
sometimes
здесь
two.
поодиночке, иногда
After
по
the death
двое.
sentence was
После того,
passed,
как
the
выносился
prisoner was
смертный
placed
приговор,
here,
заключенного
and it was
помещали
necessary
сюда.
to wait
И
for
ждать
the
казни
execution
нужно было
for
еще
about another
примерно
6 months,
полгода, пока
until
пройдет
all
вся
the paperwork
бумажная
would pass,
волокита,
an appeal,
апелляция,
a
прошение
petition
о
for clemency.
помиловании.
The papers went on for a long time, and no one knew on what particular day they would come for him. How the execution itself takes place from the prisoners of these cells was kept in the strictest
В
secret.
камеру заходят
Several people
несколько
enter the
человек.
cell. This is
Это
Mr.
господин
Executor.
исполнитель,
This is a representative of the prosecutor's
это
office.
представитель
This is a
прокуратуры,
doctor and an assistant.
это врач и помощник.
The prosecutor's
Прокуратура
office reads it
быстро
out quickly.
Зачитывает та-та-та-та-та-та-та,
Refused.
отказано.
And then
И
this
дальше
man.
этот человек,
Maybe he
может быть,
shouldn't
он
have lived because of what he did.
и жить-то не должен был из того, что он натворил.
Or maybe
может
it's a
быть, это
person who violated currency
человек,
transactions
который
and who is now.
Нарушал валютные операции. И который сейчас
His
его
descendants
потомки
serve in
служат в
banks,
банках,
and we take
а
a
мы
loan
берем
from them.
кредит.
He thought he
Он
was
считал,
going
что
to be
сейчас
taken
его куда-то
somewhere.
повезут.
By
На
some
какой-то
car to the
машине,
grove.
в рощу.
And then there
дальше
was a
возникала
picture of the
картина
world.
мира.
And it
А это было
wasn't.
не так.
He was taken out. Hands behind
Его
his back,
выводили,
handcuffs, something like a
руки
bag
за
on his
спиной.
head.
наручники, на голове что-то типа мешка,
Not to
Не для того,
humiliate,
чтобы унизить,
but so that he wouldn't
а
scream.
чтобы кричать не стал.
What will a
Что
person
человек
do
будет
in this
делать в
state?
таком состоянии? Да что
Anything.
угодно.
And hands
И
behind his back along the
Руки
long
за
corridor.
спиной вдоль длинного коридора.
And all
всё
this,
это,
of course,
конечно,
not at lunchtime, but at night.
Не в обеденное время, а по ночам.
And here
вот
they are
ведут
leading
его.
him. There is a
Здесь
camera
находится
here.
камера.
She's
Она
just
точно
like
такая же,
everyone
как все
else.
остальные.
And he
И
and the
мимо
others
этой
passed
камеры
by this camera many times.
Проходил и он много раз, и остальные.
But the camera and the
камера и
camera.
камера.
But it's not
Это
a
не
camera.
камера.
If
Если
we
мы
open
откроем
this
эту
door,
дверь,
we won't see a camera.
то мы видим не камеру,
We will see a
видим
staircase
лестницу
down,
вниз,
a certain landing,
некую
and a
площадку
door.
и дверь.
They take
Его
him
заводят
there,
туда,
down the landing.
вниз по площадке.
And
И
service
из
weapons.
табельного оружия,
At one
В свое
time, it
время
was a
это
revolver,
наган,
then it was a pistol,
потом это
and then it was a
пистолет ТТ,
Makarov pistol.
а потом это пистолет Макарова.
A shot is
Делается
fired in the
выстрел
back
в
of the head.
затылок.
The walls on the stairs
Стены на
were
лестнице
covered with
были
blankets
обиты
for
одеялом
sound
для
insulation.
звукоизоляции.
Other
С нижней
people were
ступеньки труп
already
забирали
taking the
уже
corpse from
другие
the
люди.
bottom step. The body is
Тело
put in the car
кладется в
and is
машину
not subject
и
to
со
verification
специальным
with a
талоном
special coupon.
проверке не подлежит,
It is conducted to
Ведется
some cemetery
оно на
and
какое-нибудь
buried in a
кладбище.
secret place.
и хоронится в секретном месте.
And no
И
one will
никто
know anything.
Ничего не узнает.
And at that
На
time,
тот
these
момент
were
это
top
были
secret orders.
совершенно секретные приказы.
And for
А за
the disclosure of
разглашение
those orders,
тех приказов,
well, terrible punishments were
Ну,
imposed.
положены были страшные наказания.
Who
Кто
shot?
расстреливал?
Who
Кто
took the
брал на себя
responsibility to
ответственность
execute in
казнить в
crosses?
крестах?
They say that
Говорят,
it
что
could
это
have been
мог быть
any
любой
supervisor,
надзиратель, и дело
and it
это
was
было
a purely
сугубо
voluntary
добровольное
and
и
secret case.
секретное.
None of your colleagues, let alone your household, knew that you were killing even criminals. It seems that it is impossible to get out of this cell alive. But now it is already known who came out of here himself, even twice in a row. This is Konstantin Rokossovsky, one of the greatest commanders of the Second World War. In 1937 year, Rokossovsky was arrested on false denunciation, accused of having links with Polish and Japanese intelligence. Here, the future marshal was beaten. The phalanges of his toes were crushed with a hammer, and he wore orthopedic shoes for the rest of his life. His teeth were knocked out here. And if we watch good films, competent films, then we will see that if they shoot Rokossovsky, then he has false teeth here. It was in Kresty that he was taken to the firing squad twice, trying to get him to sign a confession and hand over his accomplices. Blanks were fired to intimidate, but the future marshal did not sign anything and did not stipulate anyone. As a result, all charges were dropped and Rokossovsky was reinstated in all rights. During the war, the Kursk and Stalingrad battles were won under his command, and his Operation Bagration to liberate Belarus was included in all textbooks on the art of war. Here the general's teeth are knocked out, here he is tortured. Then he leaves, and in the 45th year on the Red Square, it is on a white horse, he was a marshal of the victory. Only this forms some kind of fantastic deep truth. Well, the Russian truth. After the victory in the Battle of Stalingrad, he received dozens of congratulatory telegrams. They say there was a telegram from the head of the crosses. A legend. Maybe. But judging by the plaque in the prison yard, it may be true. So the staff of the crosses paid tribute to the Grand Marshal. Those people who work in crosses work, right? And those who work for a long time, especially for a long time, they love it. They love it more than they do outside. Therefore, everything related to memory and so on, they did at their own expense and so on. Metal and concrete, everything is so reliable, so condos, you know. The dim light that penetrates through the dirty St. Petersburg barred windows and the cold. Yes, they haven't heated here for a long time, so the walls literally suck the heat out of me, but they give me their history. And this story is very tragic, dramatic. Somewhere even mysticism is here, secrets that have not gone beyond these walls. They are still stored here, and the majesty. Yes, there is a majesty in this place. Look at this. Even these little cameras, yes, which immediately put you on claustrophobia, yes, where it is most unpleasant not only for one, but there are 20 more people there. Yes, it's just terrible, but they are also interesting in themselves, because they are vaulted, because they have their own architecture, because it is a royal building, and more than 130 years old. In recent years, the crosses were no longer tortured or shot, but there were their own methods of pressure, also inquisitorial in their own way. For example, there are cells where tuberculosis patients, and a person, for example, you don't listen to the administration, you don't want to, so to speak, but cooperate. You don't want to be quiet. You'll get it. And the tuberculous stone defines you. And the exit from there is either to the hospital or directly to the cemetery. Because tuberculosis is not treated there in the hospital. There are, well, press huts, for example. There are people who cooperate, for example, with the administration completely, so to speak, the same arrested. But they have privileged conditions of detention. There, for example, there are not 13 people, but 2 or 3, or 4, or 5. And their task is, as it were, to do what they are told promptly. Knock out specific information, there is something. Literally knock it out. No, not directly. They will say, You need to tell me. If you tell me, you'll leave here in one piece, without a broken arm or leg. In Crosses, the medical unit is a separate huge building, and it does not look like prison premises from the word at all. Walking up the stairs, it's easy to forget that you're in prison. Look, it doesn't differ at all from the front doors in the historical part of St. Petersburg. On Petrogradka, Elenovsky is taken on such excursions, but here they took prisoners. The floors have spacious corridors with high ceilings and windows the size of the Hermitage. Really. But the Metlik tile is generally a fetish of all newfangled establishments, a pre-revolutionary artifact. And here it has been preserved just perfectly. But I remember such posters. They used to hang in all polyclinics of the country. Sleeping things, but this is even interesting information about men's health. As they say, with care for prisoners. In the corridor, we even met a leaflet with a schedule of ventilation and quartz. That is, while in the main block in the cells, people tried to survive and died from lack of oxygen. Here is the airing schedule, but not a sanatorium. It's clear why the prisoners wanted to get here, but still we haven't seen the sick cell yet. To your attention she is. An iron door with a familiar feeder, but inside there are huge ceilings, and again the same huge window. Even if it's in a grate, but compared to a regular camera, it's just a resort. But admit it, which one of you has such a huge window at home? Yes, the bars, of course, depressing, but do not forget, we are still in prison. I must say that the doctors at the Crosses, according to their own words, did not pay much attention to the article, if necessary. They simply provided medical assistance and even tried to see them as people, not criminals.
You understand, in my own, it wasn't my job to evaluate them as criminals. In other words, other bodies were engaged in this. There are courts, judges, and so on. A man with a broken arm was standing in front of me. How can I relate to him? I think I was sympathetic to him, because it still hurts, to be honest.
Nina Ivanovna has worked here for 40 years as a nurse in an X-ray room. Yes, there was such a thing here. He says that the team of doctors, as in the whole colony, was friendly. Now retired, the woman even misses her job.
Well, there was an X-ray machine here. There was an X-ray stand. There was an X-ray machine here. There's a doctor here. This was the doctor's workplace. And these were my two workplaces. This is the so-called procedural. Here, we can say, is the heart of the X-ray room. There was a control panel here. Everything is broken.
It's a pity you.
Very. Very. It's a pity. It's a pity. Youth has passed, that's what it's a pity, and life at the same time. And there was a dark room here, where I developed X-rays. This is a dark room table. There was a good team. They worked well. They knew how to relax. This picture was given to us by the sister mistress. Our craftsmen drew it. They could do a lot of things, not just paint pictures.
Craftsmen, do you mean?
The sitters, but I don't like to call them prisoners. That's why it's their creativity.
I would never say that Nina Ivanovna has worked in prison with criminals all her life. Remember, we are the same when X-rays pass there, chest X-rays. Frequent the same kind of women in hospitals that are on the wave somewhere, joke somewhere strictly to say that the place was not detained. A simple human attitude may have been found among cellmates, but it certainly could always be found in the medical unit.
The nurse was behind bars. All procedures. A patient who was in the hospital came up here, stretched out his hand. Either medical procedures were performed on him, or he received medications.
And if, excuse me, an injection needs to be made in the ass.
Then she came out here. There was a controller standing next to her.
Yeah, I see. So it was more or less safe for employees.
более-менее безопасно для сотрудников.
You know, everything is done here to make it safe for the employee.
Yeah.
Because any case, you have always told us, everything, all monuments, all recommendations, all rules, all orders, all this was written in blood.
Have you
А
ever
было
been
страшно
scared personally?
когда-нибудь вам лично?
Me.
Yes.
Да.
You know, it must have been scary at first when It's not even scary, it's unusual. There was no fear, because when I came here, I still did not understand everything that was happening around me. This was our intensive care unit.
Nevertheless, there was still a danger in the work, and not all prisoners were adequate. Drug addicts, alcoholics, and even madmen. In the complex of buildings, there was a large prison hospital with a psychiatric department. There were always from 60 to 80 people there. It seems that quite a lot, but in fact, prisoners with mental disabilities were brought here from all over the Northwestern District. At the same time, it should be understood that going to a doctor of any specialization can be an additional walk, and the convicts actively use this. For example, you tell the warden that you are dying of pain and you may not be taken to the doctor right away, but they will still take you to the doctor. It seems that it was easiest to simulate mental shifts. In this case, you can get into the medical unit quickly, but this does not mean that you will not be discovered. It is possible to simulate one mental illness if there is another mental illness. But if you are a mentally healthy person, it is impossible to simulate anything because it is very labor-intensive. You just don't have the strength. You can fool around for 2 or 3 days, maybe a week, and then you just don't have enough strength. There are cases when they try to solve some regime issues. A very good situation is when a person writes a statement, sits on a common building. An ordinary prisoner writes a statement that I hear voices order me to kill my cellmates. Naturally, they urgently give this application. And to me, I'm running all over, and there's an absolutely normal, healthy, mentally healthy person who tells me like a fool that he hears voices. All right. Just in case, I take him to my department. Well, the symptoms are serious. It's necessary after all. And when he is already sitting in my office, I explain to him that if you have this symptom, I will treat it the way it should be treated. And it's not a fact that you will like it very much. And in this conversation, he asks about the possibility of confidentiality so that no one finds out about it. And it turns out that he and his cellmates bet on 2 blocks of cigarettes, that he would be able to leave for 2 weeks for a psychiatric ward. Well, in this case, I went to meet him. Alexei worked as a doctor in the psychiatric department of Krestev for 7 years. He even hid his place of work from his family. For example, Alexei's grandmother found out about his prison past only when he published a book dedicated to his work in crosses. According to him, there were not so many mentally ill people in the crosses, but everyone's nerves gave out. It was necessary to treat newcomers especially carefully and immediately identify unstable or potential suicidal people. This prisoner, he did not come from outside. He was transferred from another region. But as soon as he stopped by, I had to twist him right away, what is called putting an imposition. Because a person somewhere managed to steal a small piece of iron like a nail during the stage, and he tried to gouge out his eyes, because during he had a heavy article, he was threatened with 18 years, and he came to court. And during the stage, someone whispered to him that there are a number of diseases with which they are being released. And one of these diseases is blindness. And therefore, that is, he did not try to do it in pictures, did not try to show something. He was really afraid, so he didn't do it abruptly, but he tried to squeeze out his eyes with this piece of iron. Other prisoners saw it and stopped it in time. And there have been cases, according to Alexei, which he still cannot explain. A person comes from the Ives, has been convicted several times before, according to a card firm, a criminal case. He has been sitting for about 20 or 25 years. The articles are mainly robbery, grievous bodily harm. All tattooed, hefty man. Well, our experienced customer. Ours is not in the sense of psychiatric, but in the sense of a client of a pretrial detention center. Naturally, I ask him how things are, if he needs any help, if he wants something from me, no. Naturally, he answers me with a smile that everything is fine, I have come to my home. With that, we said goodbye to him. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I will be there. I urgently come to work, and it turns out that this character hanged himself on a torn sheet on the window grate. I had no suspicions about this man. Absolutely normal, healthy, cheerful convict. Why a seasoned convict committed suicide, having arrived in Kresty, is unknown. As for me, the very sight of these cameras and everything that is here can cause quiet horror and depression. But, according to Alexis, just depression among prisoners was not. Maybe it's related to stress, maybe some other things. There were depressive episodes, but more often still acute reactions. They manifest themselves a little differently. Let's say we had a wonderful guy, young, 22 years old, who stopped by, served in the army before that, did not cause any questions, graduated from vocational school, had some kind of specialty, and suddenly he stops eating. And this is the picture of mental degradation. He stops eating, not because he went on a hunger strike, he forgot how to eat. You feed him with a spoon, he eats. Then he forgot how to dress, how to go to the toilet. In other words, we had to assign him to the department an orderly who dressed him, washed him, who forced him to eat. If he is not watered, he will not drink for a day. If he is not fed, he will not have the smell of acetone and other charms for a day. But the most amazing thing is that he was released from the courtroom, and when the judge released him, he got up and walked on as if nothing had happened. Everything went at once. It wasn't some kind of simulation, it wasn't some kind of aggravation, or an attempt to mislead someone. He was really in this state. It's hard to imagine what that guy experienced after his release and how he remembers that part of his life now. It is impossible to imagine how many tragedies these walls remember. They're coming. That's it. Come to me. And you come in. Evgeny Vaishenkov spent a year in Crosses. He was sentenced to 6 years and left to serve time in Nizhny Tagil. He was released in '96 on parole and became a well-known Russian journalist specializing in criminal topics. With the help of his journalistic investigations, several contract murders were solved. He wrote a book about the history of racketeering and was a co-author of many books by Andrei Konstantinov. Yes, the one who wrote The Bandit Petersburg. And some scenes were filmed in the Crosses themselves. Vaishenkov even played one of the bandits there. He took me to the Crosses for a long time and, did not feel pain or regret in his memories. It's just a part of my life. How do I feel when I go to my house? Nothing. What do I feel? Every day I drive past my native sports school, where I spent 10 years. It's just a part of my life, like this. Here's the finger. What do I feel when I look at my finger? I don't feel anything. Well, try to take it away. Yes, break it. Immediately the picture of the world will play. Try to erase this piece of life. But I will be different. Well, like any person, only everyone has their own camera. The main thing is to respect the crosses. Alexander Nevzorov did not get a term, limited himself to serving time in Crosses. No one canceled corruption, and he was released a year later for a big bribe. But he refused to go to the Crosses themselves. My camera was over there. She is, and now she is. Third window on the left, fourth floor, camera to one here. I was there from April 99th to April 2000th year, exactly a year in this cell. And I looked there at this beautiful view, at him. You can hear cars, pleasure boats with music in summer. And if you look out of the apartment, then you can only rejoice. But to look at a carefree, cheerful life from the window of a prison cell is just torture. There were women with children standing there. Girls came here, shouting to the prisoners, passing greetings. They shouted to them, "I love you," and so on. Employees tried to disperse these women, but it was not always possible. And what is interesting is that when these girls come from outside, they gather on the embankment and shout, "I love you." But you can't say such a cry from the camera. That is, it is not according to concepts. And him. Yes, and him. There is a lot being said in conversation here that is not the same as in the wild. And he answers, "I don't love you." He shouts the same shit at her. I think if I had answered my girlfriend like that, then in general I would not have been so much expected at home. But that's not all that can't be said there. You can't say lips, you can't say. Why do they say in the gums? They returned to Desna. Why do they say lips were sent? Because you can't use jargon to say lips. You can't say thank you. I asked one, and why do I say thank you? Well, I don't know exactly, but it sounds like the word suck, you know. That's his theory. Due to the fact that the main physical attraction in prison is unrealizable because of this, so to speak. It all leaves certain imprints on the life of prisoners. It leaves an imprint on the conversation, on the relationship, on something else. What has happened in these walls, and truly romantic story. There is a film from the 90s prison romance, where the main roles were played by Alexander Abdulov and Marina Nilova. A heartbreaking story about how a female investigator fell in love with a criminal in crosses and helped him arrange an escape. It seems like some kind of stupid plot for a cheap melodrama, but it really was. In 1991, investigator Natalia Vorontsova was part of the group that dealt with the case of Sergei Madwev. He was accused of more than 60 crimes. These are robberies and murders, and he was given the ultimate measure execution at that time. Natalia traveled for 2 months to Kresty for interrogations and fell in love, so much so that she handed him a gun. But when he tried to escape, the guards still managed to tie him down. Natalia was jailed for 7 years. Madwev, thanks to this story, escaped the tower. While his failed escape was being dismantled, a moratorium on the death penalty was introduced. He was imprisoned for life, and 7 years later, he died from the effects of diabetes. Another famous escape was described in detail in our cart. But there are also those who are very comfortable here. The last inhabitants of the crosses are cats. They accompanied me during all the shooting days. Nina Ivanovna comes here to feed the tails and hopes that each of them will still find their home.
They deserve a better life, of course, but thank God that they help us here with food, and the security guys feed them, because I don't come every day.
Ребята-охранники кормят их, потому что я не каждый день прихожу.
Here.
Вот.
And there are people who provide all possible assistance, both parishioners and volunteers.
И прихожане, и по линии волонтеров.
You know, of course, such help is pleasant. First of all, they understand that otherwise cats would have been doomed to starvation. And the second point, of course, I would like them to continue living here. Whatever is here. After all, these cats, they also have a little bit to do with the history of crosses.
Guys,
Нет у меня,
I don't
ребят,
have any,
какого-то,
you know,
знаете,
a single
единого
impression, which is
впечатления,
usually
которое
formed
обычно
from
формируется
someplace.
от какого-то места.
It's so twofold, I would even
Такое
say
двоякое, я
threefold.
бы даже сказал
Let our
троякое.
editor
Пусть
scold
меня
me,
наш редактор
but it's so
заругает, но это
because
так,
you
потому
take a
что ты
step.
делаешь шаг,
And you get
и тебя
claustrophobic,
нахлобучивают
which presses on you with its concrete,
которая
bars.
давит на тебя своим бетоном, решетками.
You turn
Ты
on your
включаешь
imagination,
воображение,
you use empathy,
ты
and you feel all the fear
используешь
and horror of these
эмпатию, да,
places.
и ты
You
чувствуешь
can imagine
весь,
how you entered this
страх и
cell
ужас
as a
этих
newcomer.
мест. Ты можешь
There
себе
are 19
представить,
people
как ты
there, and you are the
вошел, маленький,
20th.
в эту камеру, там 19 человек, а ты 20.
The only
Единственное
place you
место,
can
где ты
live
можешь
is in
жить,
front
это
of the parasha.
напротив параши,
Yes,
да.
and that's it.
И,
And imagine
ну, всё,
20
а вы
people in a
представьте,
cell
20
for
человек в
24
камере,
hours a
сутки,
day.
24
That
часа.
is,
То есть
every
каждый
hour
час
someone is
кто-то
here.
вот-
Here he is.
вот он.
And there's nothing you
И
can
ты ничего не
do.
можешь сделать.
And you're
И
not
ты
even
даже
down there
не
any.
опущен
Yes,
там
that's how they
какой-то, да,
say.
вот как говорят.
You
Ты просто-
just
тебе просто
have
сесть
nowhere
негде.
to
Ты
sit.
пришел новенький, и
You
пока
came new,
кого-то
and
не
until
вывел,
someone
ты
is
не
taken
можешь
out,
продвинуться
you
дальше.
can't move on. And you
И
feel
ты
it
всё
all
это чувствуешь,
just walking into
просто
this
заходя
place.
в это место.
And then you
А потом
take
ты
another
делаешь
step,
другой
and
шаг.
wow.
И вау,
Wow.
вот это да.
The greatness of these
Величие вот
glasses
этих
here,
вот,
which are in the center
стаканов,
of the
которые вот
crosshair.
перекрестие, это в центре перекрестия.
Architecture, royal brick, space, some interesting moves. That is, wow, class. I go and think, damn, it's beautiful. It's just not something that can be ennobled, but it's already beautiful in itself. There's something to clean up somewhere. And then further on you stumble, some kind of garbage dam, fucking abandonment. Well, again I'm climbing in some incomprehensible places. And then in this garbage, you see some detail, and realize that it's 10 or 20 years old. It belonged to someone. It went through a whole story. Maybe it belonged to some great man who left an indelible mark on our country. And that's how your impression changes step by step. It's very diverse. It's very deep. That's right, deep. That is, both the admiration is huge, and the feeling of horror that you can even imagine, but it will be completely different. Here is this feeling of horror. It is interspersed. And here the main, and probably the main question arises. Does prison correct a person? Is it true that if he is placed in unbearable conditions, he can improve forever? And then what about people who spend time after time with a short break at will? They know where they're going back, right? But they still commit crimes, return there, because it seems to them that they are more comfortable there than on the outside. I mean, is there really something in this for them? In other words, I have not met people who would say that I received a punishment from the state. I have served it and I feel that I have become different because I have been re-educated. That is, how would this system really work? I was a criminal, a bad person. Now I got out. I was good. I do other wonderful things. I think differently. Sort of. Hardly anyone will say about it. Because being there, in prison, you are in a different circle of communication than you are on the outside. You have no family, no friends. That is, there are friends, but they are forced friends, and friends, so to speak, by misfortune, who teach you not that it is necessary to look at life with different eyes. But how next time not to get caught, how to steal it truly, how to do a good life, not to make mistakes in criminal activities in the future. In other words, prison does not fix it, but it scares in itself, so as not to get there a second time. Yes, I mean yes. And you're not getting better, you're getting more careful. And I have always been surprised, of course, by these clean and comfortable cells in European prisons. Do you know what conditions Anders Breivik is in? This is the one who, in the 2011 year in Norway, first blew up a minibus packed with explosives in the center of the capital, and then shot people in a police uniform at a mass city event. 80 corpses and 150 wounded. He was put in jail for 21 years. But what kind of prison is this? Look, 3 rooms, 24 square meters. A bedroom with a work desk, a gym next door. Breivik does not share this block with anyone. For a second, he's not crazy. The examination really showed that he committed the massacre, being in his right mind and right memory. And what is the result? The only inconvenience to you is the restriction of freedom. And the rest? Yes, listen, such conditions are like, well, not everyone has it on the outside. But nevertheless, these conditions seem to be tortuous to the analyst. Did this man deserve such conditions? You actually live at the expense of the state, very comfortably. Alexander has his own opinion on this, which made me think. The prison should be the same as it is shown in movies by pro-Western countries, where prisoners are 2 or 3 people in a cell, where there is a shower, where they have all the rights, where they can, so to speak, communicate with each other, communicate with people on the outside. Punishment, of course, should be, but not punishment is not like that, not bestial, so to speak, but human punishment should be. A person, what isolates him from society, he has already been punished. I think so. I think that any prison works, even such as in Norway. I think this is true, regardless of the conditions of detention. Isolating a person from society is a great punishment in itself. So isolation is a punishment, and quite serious. Yes, most of all, when you sit, you want to be free. I don't want anything else. No eating, no drinking, no smoking. Just to be out there in the wild. The crosses were eventually sold for more than $1 billion. And according to the plan, nothing should change here. You can't change the layout, you can't break down walls, attach attics, hang air conditioners on the facade, and so on. Crosses should not lose their face. It is an object of architectural heritage. Shkanki, bars, iron, doors with theaters are unlikely to remain, of course, but the spirit of crosses should be in everything. It is not yet known what exactly will happen here. Restaurants, public space, a museum, or even a hotel. I can already imagine this 5-star miracle with Belanda on the buffet for breakfast and co-working in cells of 8 square meters. In general, today we saw the crosses as they will never be again.